You join me, currently on our way up to London, to collect what is actually quite a rare and weird Sony computer. And unfortunately, my actual car's broken, so we're travelling here with 4 gears and 45 horsepower in a 1980s Volkswagen Polo. So it's going to be a bit of a drive there. But long story short, the seller on this computer, I've been following it for a while, and because it's collection only, no one's been looking at buying it. And then about 2 in the morning, he sent out a 50% off discount. So of course I accepted the discount before realizing, hang on a second, I don't actually have a car to get up to London in other than this. So we're going to go pick up this computer and we'll check in after that. So here we have it, the Sony whatever this thing is, and I've just plugged it all in and we're ready to turn it on. So let's find out what this thing actually does. There was a fan noise, a loud fan noise, and is it going to do anything? We've got an on-screen, starting Windows. Now that looks a bit too modern to be Windows Vista. That's looking an awful lot like Windows 7. I don't know if you can make that out. See if I can zoom in a little bit. We are starting Windows. Please actually start and do something. I'm a little bit concerned. Okay, we're just on a starting Windows screen. Might be here a little while. There we go. It is starting Windows. Let's plug in a mouse and keyboard or something. Are we going to get to the desktop? Yes. Windows 7 Ultimate. That's a bit more of an upgrade than I was thinking we'd get. Right, we're at the Windows desktop. So the last time this has been used, well, the last time, clearly the CMOS battery or time's not set or something, because it's reset itself to New Year's Eve 2007. That's the date we've got down here. New Year's Eve 2007. It's half an hour to 2008. We've got a countdown going on. That's quite impressive. If you look at the desktop there, the only things included on the computer is we've got a pirated copy of Frozen. No, clearly not a pirated copy. This is a DVD rip of Frozen, Alvin and the Chipmunks, Angry Birds, and something else. Just what is this running? I have no clue what this thing is actually running. Let's find out. Let's run DXDiag real quick. DXDiag. And what are we actually running? Right, we've got Windows 7 Ultimate 64-bit, which is nice. It's registered as Sony PC. We've got the model name, and it's running a rather high-spec Core 2 Duo, which is a 3GHz E8400, which is actually a remarkably good chip. And we've got 4GB of RAM. We've also got the NVIDIA GeForce 9300M GS, which is, you know, not exactly a brilliant chip, but still a 9000 series, dedicated graphics. I mean, it's got actual VRAM and things with it. This has got a dedicated graphics card, a high-clocked Core 2 Duo, 4GB of RAM, and is running Windows 7 Ultimate. Can we download GPU-Z real quick? Okay, we have got Internet Explorer. Can we set the time? Setting the time might actually help here. 11:43. We did skip New Year. Right, can we go to Google real quick? But the Wi-Fi's working. We're on Wi-Fi. Sound working. Oh, those are loudspeakers. We can't get to Google on it though. Can we download GPU-Z? And while we're at it, can we open a new tab? Multitasking already. Unigine. Let's search for Unigine. Let's see if we can download Unigine Valley or something. Okay, what's this doing in like Task Manager right now? The processor is working quite hard, but it is a Core 2 Duo, and we have still got a lot of overhead. It's not going up to 100%. It's actually manufactured by Sony. The graphics card in this is a Sony version of the 9300M GS from 2008. We have 8 unified shaders. I did think it had more than that. 4 ROPs, 4 TMUs. We're running the 2015 drivers. They did drivers till 2015 on this. That is impressive. Really is. That's a woeful amount of shaders. Has it actually got dedicated VRAM? Do we know? Yes, it has got dedicated GDDR3 VRAM at 1/4 GB. Right, so we got Valley installed real quick. Let's just give this thing a quick stress test. This is the strangest thing I've ever seen. Let's get a full view just so you can appreciate the majesty. This thing is massive. What resolution even is this screen? Oh, the speakers have kicked in. They are loud speakers. Oh, they are very loud. It's a Sony television, so no surprise there. It has very good speakers. What resolution is this, though? It is running 1920 by 1200, a 16 by 10, beautiful looking screen, which is a bit of a nightmare to film. Why did they make this? This just seems excessive. I mean, it's really cool. Sony's weird gaming TV, we know it works. I managed to get one, but why don't we try and find out a little bit more about why this thing actually exists? Because it doesn't make any sense for this to be a real computer. Even those speakers, those are television quality speakers in a computer that boots to Windows 7. I mean, it does have controls on it. Like, you've got the TV controls here, and we've got HDMI selection tools along the side, so we can choose whether we're on TV mode or anything like that. And I think we've got a menu along the bottom somewhere. Yeah, we've got like a standard television menu. I know it's got an aerial tuning port on the back of it. The only thing that did happen in transit was part of this fell off. It didn't get knocked about or anything. This just decided it no longer wanted to be part of the computer. I don't even know where it's from. It's absolutely brilliant. It looks amazing. Why don't we carry on with the rest of the video?
Honestly though, this thing was actually rather quick to use out of the box. The only thing that was strange was the abnormally long boot time when we first plugged it in, and after that it seemed to sort itself out and got quicker and quicker the more we actually used it. I did go through all the settings and try and sort out those weird scaling issues that were happening, because despite how smooth it all was, we definitely wanted to get rid of the drivers that were on here and reinstall some of the more basic ones that were available. Fortunately, being a CUDA based Nvidia chip, albeit a mobile one, Nvidia did actually offer nearly a decade of support on these, which means even here on Windows 7 we can get relatively modern drivers that should sort out some of these rather mundane issues. While all this was happening though, I loaded the machine with as much modern software as I could find. So we got rid of Internet Explorer for Firefox, I got rid of all of the drivers and replaced them with up-to-date pieces, but just what is this thing and where exactly did it come from?
So just what is this weird Sony contraption? Because there's very little information out there online, and trust me, I've done the digging, and I think I've come across 2 actual complete reviews, and one of them I had to pay to read. So I've done as much digging on this as I can history-wise. In terms of cropping up on the internet, there isn't much on them, because they weren't a huge success. I mean, this thing was meant to be almost a competitor to the iMac, but with extra features, because it came out in 2008, and they did 3 models, this one being the entry-level model, which is still a rather high-end computer. The others came with slightly better processors, and one came with a slightly better graphics card, but that is about the extent of the range. They all came with the same 1200p screen, and they all came with more or less the same design. So what you got was a essentially Sony Bravia-esque television running a full LGA 775 computer. They shipped with Windows Vista, and they all shipped with Nvidia dedicated graphics cards. Reviewers of the time pretty much said they couldn't get things to run on them properly because the pre-release drivers they were sent out with didn't work properly. And then when you check the forums, most people that had one of these ran into similar problems. Why? Because they simply didn't load things properly or do the things they were meant to do until years after their release, when Sony had eventually ironed out the quirks. At that point, no one was interested, because as much as this is a computer, you've got HDMI input, you've got AV input, you've even got an RF tuner. So you've got an above 1080p television and a really nice computer to boot. But eventually, as time went on, I think by 2014 Sony had completely discontinued the range, as these were available on special order for about 6 years after their initial launch, I'm assuming to try and clear stock, because it's such a unique concept. Don't get me wrong, we know Sony have made weird televisions. They made ones with the PlayStation 2 inside, they made ones that were 3D with the PlayStation 3, but one that runs Windows Vista and can launch an application set that, you know, is unique to Windows, all while functioning as a television, is just straight up weird. So it wasn't a huge success for Sony, but it was one that lingered on, and lingered on because they couldn't shift them. So that is the Sony, whatever the weird model name is. I mean, these things have got awful model names, which doesn't help. They still do. This is the VGC LV1S. They did the 2S and they did the 3S. So this is the entry level to their high-end range. It's meant to be a Mac competitor, but it's also meant to be a television competitor. Who knows? I don't know who the target audience for this thing was, but it exists. Anyway, that is about what this thing is. Now we want to find out what it can actually do.
So while we've been rambling about the history of the strangest iMac competitor to ever exist, I've been loading this thing with as many applications as I can. And the biggest one you're all going to be wondering is Steam, which does surprisingly still work on Windows 7. I've mentioned it a few times now. I mean, it certainly has its own issues, mostly with RAM usage going up through the roof for no reason, but I loaded up my standard benchmarking install, and then we made a bat file that pretty much the moment Steam launched, anything that wasn't directly needed for it to run was set to bottom priority, and it keeps the RAM usage low and stops it sort of exploding for no reason. We also had Steam set to the tiny mode that they've done their utmost to hide away in recent years, so you can actually still have Steam running on what is a glorified television, and it was quite easy to do. The rest of the things we installed weren't from Steam, so they were easy to do, just double click and run, and it was the only time we got this thing to slow down, because we had 5 different installers on the go, which is not only excessive, but also very stupid. And the only part that was struggling, well, it wasn't our Core 2 Duo, that was doing fine. We were entirely limited by that mechanical hard drive. But just what are the full specifications of our weird Sony Vaio television thing? Well, it mostly uses a Sony Bravia gloss panel, which was mostly reserved for their higher-end display units, not your standard Bravia, which explains the unreasonably high fidelity of the screen, and also its 16:10 resolution. In fact, most components from this seem to have been stolen out of the Bravia range. It is also powered by a Core 2 Duo E8400, which was actually one of the most common chips by the later Core 2 series end years, and it comes clocking in at 3 GHz, and even today it can hold its own when it comes to day-to-day usage. Really, we need to revisit them. It has 4 GB of DDR2, clocking in at 800 MHz, nothing fancy, but it works, and it is powered by the questionable NVIDIA GeForce 9300M GS chip, which was an entry-level mobile chip provided by NVIDIA that has then been repackaged by Sony and whacked into these here computers. It's not fancy by any means, with 8 whole CUDA cores, but it does its best to make up for it with a decent amount of dedicated VRAM for its era and some okayish clocks out of the box. It also boasts a stupid amount of functionality, this PC, with some of the best speakers I've heard in years. It has an RF tuner, S-video inputs, composite inputs, HDMI inputs, everything you'd expect from a television. The only thing we're missing here is a remote, which they did sell, but good luck finding one. Prices on these seem to have ranged from about £1,000 to £1,400 back in the day, depending on where you were trying to get one. Today, if you can find one, you'll be able to get them for around £100. I, for example, got this one for £70, but I had to go and get it. So just as it seems we have everything up and ready to run, for a television, it was actually really smooth to get here. But before we jumped into anything, I want to see just how much power we could eke out of this thing with a little bit of overclocking.
So one thing I did want to do quickly was see if we could do a little bit of overclocking. Because as it stands, we do actually have a dedicated graphics card, and I wanted to see if maybe we could push things a little bit further. So we're going to open up Open Hardware Monitor and see what we can do here. And we're just going to monitor the temperatures, make sure things aren't getting too hot, because the processor certainly does get a little bit warm in here. So we'll drop that down to a nice low resolution, running just a little window. And what we want to do is see if we can, get a little bit more out of the system. Unfortunately, we don't have a great deal of thermal headroom because I have been stressing the system out quite a lot, and it is already running at 76 degrees. So we're going to see what it does if we start boosting things up higher. Let's turn the volume off here. We'll try and hit 650. Can we do 700 maybe? We can probably max this out, to be fair. Can we do 755? We can do 755 megahertz. But can we shift the memory at all? Because we are nearly double the frame rate in certain places now. We can hit 750. It's worth noting these machines do run hot, and the fans currently haven't revved up yet. We can do 850 megahertz. Yes, we can max out the sliders. And we'll leave that running quickly as a stability test, but I think that's as far as we're going to be able to go here. This is, at the end of the day, it's a television. I didn't think I'd be overclocking a TV. Yeah, the graphics chip's up to 83. These top out at 90. They were a laptop chip, so they were designed to run hot. The reason a lot of these don't exist anymore is because they ran very hot and ended up very dusty and then died. This one's actually in remarkably good condition, and may have actually been serviced or had new thermal paste, because everything's relatively stable. The processor's boosting up and we're still under 80 degrees. The graphics card boosting up with overclocks and is around 80 degrees. Well, we'll leave it running, make sure it's stable. These are the overclocks we're going to have. The system is stable, it's not getting too hot. Not exactly a quick bit of performance, is it? we'll go on from there. Why not?
And that appeared to be everything. We had the system overclocked, which is the strangest thing. I still can't get over overclocking a television, but we had Steam running, we had plenty of applications installed, we even had Fraps running so we could at least monitor the frame times and the frame rate. All that was left to do was to launch some games and find out if you should buy a Sony television as a bit of a gaming machine in the benchmarks. Starting off the benchmarks, we have Halo Combat Evolved, which we were able to run with the very high settings in an 800p resolution. A lot of the time the game would average well into the hundreds of FPS when not much was going on, but the moment you're in combat you'd generally be seeing around 76 FPS, which is by no means a bad thing at all, especially when you consider we had all of the particle effects turned on. Now, there was one instance where we would drop down to the mid-40s, but this was in one of the most intensive parts that I benchmark, and this can bring even very good systems of the era down to a crawl. So Halo Combat Evolved, fully playable in above 720p, and you're still going to be seeing above 60 FPS most of the time. Next up was Far Cry 1, which did actually run remarkably well. You'll have to forgive some of the capture quality issues here because we've not got any HDMI output and it is rather difficult to film a glossy television. I was also still getting used to my new camera in certain places, so for some reason the shutter speed makes the footage look slower than it actually was. It's not too bad, but I thought I'd just tell you anyway. Either way, Far Cry 1 with high settings in 800p looked absolutely brilliant with 54 FPS on average. Generally, Far Cry can have problems on certain systems, and it can bring even relatively decent ones from the era down to a crawl. We're talking 20 to 30 FPS on awful frame time issues. But here, on the weird Sony Vaio television thing, we were seeing upwards of 60 FPS a lot of the time, and the mid-50s when we were in combat. Star Wars Battlefront was one that I originally tried in the full native resolution of 1200p, and that was a little bit optimistic as the game would run at about 15 to 30 FPS, and that 15 FPS was when something was happening, so we ended up opting for high settings in 800p, where we saw around 62 FPS on average. Generally, when not much was happening, this would be into the hundreds, like most things tend to be, because that Core 2 Duo has tons and tons of headroom, but generally, when something was happening, we'd be down to sort of the mid-40s, so it was by no means a bad experience, and it's only when things got intensive that you'd see around 34 to 36 frames per second, so for classic titles like Star Wars Battlefront, it worked rather well. I wasn't originally planning on testing Unreal Gold, but we did run the game with high settings in 1200p, and to add to this, we also ran the driver-side enhancements for absolutely everything we could find turned on, and during the flyover sequence, it never broke away from 60 FPS. Now this was in 1600 by 1200, which conveniently, you have got so much resolution headroom on this monitor, you can actually run that resolution and scale it properly. So for older games, you can play them in a proper 4:3 resolution scaled, and it looks absolutely fantastic with no performance issues whatsoever. Unfortunately, with Black Mesa, it didn't matter how long I left it loading, we would just be stuck at the start screen, and tweaking the CFG file or the INI files or anything like that was not enough to make it playable. I'm not too sure why, but for some reason the game would just lock up the system. So instead of that, I decided to run Counter-Strike Source with the high settings in 800p. Now I wasn't very good at it because I'm not very good at Counter-Strike Source, but we were able to actually play the game with around 46 FPS on average. You could turn down the eye candy or turn down the resolution and see an even higher frame rate than this because that Core 2 Duo can just blast through Source games with no problems whatsoever. But Counter-Strike Source, you can play it online and you can get in intensive situations, and you are still going to be seeing a fully competitive frame rate. Just if you want it to be more competitive than this, you are going to have to opt for something that isn't the high settings. Rather impressively though, Skyrim, with predominantly lower settings but a few medium options turned on, was actually playable in 1024 by 768 using just the hardware that comes inside this television, which is ridiculous. This is an Xbox 360 game running on a television that is from that sort of era. It doesn't make sense. This is just a weird product. But you can actually play Skyrim. I mean, even when you're in a town and city and things were quite intense, the main thing detracting from the frame rate was the particle effects of the flames I was using. So you can enjoy Skyrim quite easily, and even in the most intensive of situations, you are still going to be seeing in and around 30 FPS, which is nice to see. RimWorld did actually prove rather intensive on the Core 2 Duo, which is no surprise, but this is a very single-threaded game, and the Core 2 Duo for its era does have remarkably decent single-threaded performance. So we were actually able to play things through and actually use the speed-up mode and actually see the tick rate of the game increase, because that's what matters. Although even in 800p with the default settings, that little Nvidia chip really is going to struggle to see more than 20 FPS. The good news is, because we are so limited by that, you can play through the game quite easily, and as long as you're comfortable with that frame rate, a smaller game on a smaller map with a smaller colony is more than playable on a television. Rather than just running any version of Minecraft, I decided to run Tekkit Classic, which we were running with fast settings, but we did have smooth lighting enabled, and this was in the native 1900 by 1200 resolution. I think it's 1900 by 1200. It's around that sort of resolution. It is incredibly good to look at here, and it was around 68 FPS on average, occasionally going higher than this and occasionally dropping below it. When chunks were loading in, of course, we could see a brief moment of stutter, but it was always going to stutter. This is a Core 2 Duo running Minecraft. That's just how they used to run. In fact, I used to play on an i8-400, but I didn't have the luxury of dedicated graphics. So it's nice to see that OpenGL, and it handles itself really well here on the Nvidia chip built into the telly. But finally, can it run Crysis? Well, with low settings in 800 by 600, we did actually manage to achieve a really quite playable frame rate. I mean, it didn't look its best, but it still hovered around 42 FPS, which is really rather decent. I did start off trying higher settings, but unfortunately that little 8300 or 9300 GS chip really can't manage Crysis all too well. I mean, it's admirable that we can play Crysis on an overclocked television of all things, and I think that really is the main takeaway from this. We are playing Crysis on an overclocked television, but we will just have to use lower settings in 800 by 600 to make it playable. You can increase the graphics settings, but you'll be looking at more of a PowerPoint than a game. Gaming performance overall for a PC is not exactly what I would call a performance powerhouse, but it is rather admirable that with no additional hardware, just what comes with this television thing, we were quite comfortably able to not just run, but enjoy quite a few titles. I mean, seeing Crysis launch on an overclocked television from Sony sounds as stupid as it seems, but this is from the era where Crysis came out. A lot of classic titles can run in HD resolutions with higher settings, and Minecraft was mysteriously able to run in above 1080p and still see 60 FPS a lot of the time. I know a lot of reviewers from the era were talking about adding the Xbox 360 in for the gaming aspect, and sure, it is very comparable. Take a game like Skyrim, and over on the 360 you're playing the same game at a similar frame rate, but you get a bit of a performance bump over there, which you don't get here. But still, we are running these games on the hardware that comes built in, and they offered more powerful versions of this. It's just a shame that a lot of games today require launchers that won't start on Windows 7. I'll hark on about it for ages, but we don't need to here. It's just a shame because we can't test things like GTA 5 just for the novelty of seeing it run. Emulation was a bit of a mixed bag, because I know a lot of people are looking at this and thinking it'll make an ideal retro gaming setup, and to a degree, yes, you are right, because when you scale things properly on this screen, it looks brilliant, and you are directly connected to the display, if that makes sense. The issues come from when you start moving past the Nintendo 64 in terms of emulation. Things like Dolphin will run, but I struggle to get anything past 10 FPS, even after a decent amount of tweaking. Older performance forks just don't like working with the graphics card in here, which is fair enough, and the newer ones use API calls that are too new for it and can lead to some very lethargic performance. With PlayStation 1 and the likes though, if you spend enough time tweaking around with things, you could actually enjoy quite a lot of games with little to no slowdown. I mean, within no time we had Metal Gear Solid running with a CRT filter that really does suit the display. So maybe it could be one of the new niches for it here, and maybe it's an area we could probably look into a bit more if people really really want to see an emulation-focused video with this strange thing, we could always see just how far we can actually push it. So it does seem like emulation is a good option, you just have to temper your expectations. When it comes to media playback, the only downside is going to ever be the hardware decoding properties of this thing, because it will struggle with newer codecs. But then again, if you want something for offline playback, you've got Blu-ray, you've got optical output, not that you'd need it for the quality of the speakers that are on here, and it will run and support Kodi just fine. I wish there was something more exciting to say about it, but it's not really a surprise here. This thing was sold as a television, and in a lot of aspects, the television side of this is fleshed out a lot more than the PC side, because it simply works great as a television even today. I mean, I did try some of the expandability with it, and yeah, you plug something in and it works straight away. The moment it detects a signal, you can select that as a source. So composite, HDMI, RF, whatever you fancy plugging in, it'll display, and it will look fairly decent on the screen to boot. So there we have it, Sony's weird Vaio television thing. And I don't know where my thoughts properly stand, because it was expensive to buy today, and as a TV, it's about £40 more expensive than I'd pay for an equivalent Bravia television like this. And as a computer, it's about £60 more expensive than it should be, because it's just an LGA 775 PC with a dedicated Nvidia chip. It's not exciting. But because it's a Sony, and the way it's all brought together, and how oddball it is, means that it's not just fun, it is kind of exciting, and it's why they are so sought after today, because it's an oddball thing, and a lot of people want it just for a collection. Because compare it to every other all-in-one you've seen, even modern ones, it just looks better, it works better. Compare it to the ones from the mid-2000s, and it completely demolishes them in terms of the quality of the device, and actually how it is to use, because we've been doing everything from surfing the web to running programs and games, and it still does its job. And this thing is now, what, 17 years old? Which is astonishing that it runs this well. Anyway, thank you all very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this weird episode on the Sony Vaio. It's taken a while for it to all come together. I've been following this auction on eBay for probably about 4 months now, waiting to try and get it. So, thank you all very much for watching, and good night.